What if I told you the Eureka Stockade wasn't just about gold licenses? What if it wasn't just a handful of angry miners fighting against unfair government fees? What if the entire rebellion at Ballarat in 1854 was actually a war to protect the last remnants of Tartarian technology that could have rebuilt Australia after the reset? They don't tell you this in school. They can't. Because if you knew the truth, if you understood what those men were really fighting for, you'd start asking questions. Questions about gold. Questions about the ruins we walk past every single day. Questions about who we really are. Why do governments worship gold like it's holy? Why do central banks hoard it, lock it away, and never let the people near it? Do you really think it's just about wealth? Or is it because gold is the perfect conductor of energy? The key to Tartarian mana, the technology that allowed people to move massive stones and build impossible architecture without lifting a finger? The miners at Ballarat weren't just chasing fortunes in the dirt. Many of them came from families with direct connections to the old world, to Tartaria. They knew what gold could do. They knew it was more than shiny metal. It was the very thing the new government was desperate to suppress, to erase, to hide. Because if Australians remembered what gold could really be used for, they would have rebuilt the Tartarian infrastructure that had survived the reset. Do you think it's just a coincidence that the Eureka Stockade happened less than 60 years after the reset? That was still a time when people remembered. The older generations carried the knowledge of Tartaria. They remembered the great buildings, the free energy, the way communities lived without money, without control, without the parasites of government. But those born after the reset, or worse, the clones made after the reset, couldn't see it. They believed whatever story was fed to them, and today you still see their descendants walking past the ruins, blind to the truth. Look at the official history. They'll tell you Governor Hotham demanded gold licenses to pay for the police, the soldiers, the bureaucracy. They'll tell you miners like Peter Lalore only wanted fair treatment, that it was a simple matter of taxes and injustice. But do you really believe hundreds of men, thousands of families would risk their lives just over a few pieces of paper? Or were they standing against something far darker, the complete erasure of their history, their land, their identity? They burned Tartarian buildings across Australia. They tore down monuments. They destroyed technology that could have freed humanity forever. Why? So future generations would forget. So you and I would walk past giant old-world buildings and believe the lie that convicts built them with pickaxes and horse carts. Why do we accept these ridiculous stories? Why do we swallow the lies when the evidence is staring us in the face? At Ballarat, the miners raised the Southern Cross flag. They swore an oath to stand together, to defend each other, to fight for justice. But what justice were they really swearing for? Was it just lower license fees? Or was it for their families, their lineage, their connection to Tartaria? When you look at Peter Lalore, not as a rebel against taxes, but as a defender of ancient knowledge, the entire story flips on its head. Why did the government bring in soldiers and police with such fury? Why such violence over a rebellion that could have been solved with a compromise? Because they weren't just crushing a tax protest. They were crushing the last open resistance of Tartarian descendants in Australia. They were burying the truth under mud, blood, and propaganda. Think about it. The Eureka Stockade lasted only a short time. The miners built barricades, armed themselves, and prepared to stand against the Crown. The government sent in troops, burned the stockade, and massacred dozens. But why such bloodshed? Why the brutality? When the government paints people as villains, you can almost guarantee those people were actually the heroes. The miners were heroes. The government was the villain. The textbooks invert it, always. And what about you? What about your family? Do you feel connected to this land? Do you feel the old buildings speaking to you when you walk through Melbourne or Sydney? That feeling is your bloodline. That is Tartaria speaking. If you feel nothing, if you worship rules and love authority, maybe you are descended from the clones, the empty shells created after the reset to replace the true people of this land. They want you to forget. They want you to believe that gold is just currency, that the stockade was just a tax revolt, that history is exactly as they tell it. But look deeply. Why is gold so controlled? Why are old world buildings explained away with lies? Why do they laugh at anyone who dares to ask these questions? Because the truth is dangerous. The truth wakes people up. The men at the Eureka Stockade didn't just fight for money. They fought to protect the memory of Tartaria. They fought to defend their families and the future of Australia from being buried in lies. And although they were crushed, their stand echoes to this day. So what about us? Are we just going to walk past the ruins, heads down, believing the fairy tales of textbooks written by the victors? Or are we going to look deeper, see the truth, and fight back in our own way? The government still works the same way it did then. It still destroys, still burns, still rewrites history. but we don't have to accept it. The Eureka Stockade was not just the birth of Australian democracy like the schools claim. It was the last visible battle of Tartarian descendants in Australia, fighting against the evil forces who wanted to erase everything. It was a fight for mana, for knowledge, for the right to remember who we really are. Now I ask you, are you connected to this land? Do you feel it in your heart? Or do you accept the lies and walk blindly like the clones? The choice is yours.